Hey guys, today I'm teaching you guys how to read because, yeah, some of you can't, and it's always helpful to be able to teach people how to read. So, we're going to start off very simple. So, every single effect in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically can be categorized in like more or less three different types. There are ignition effects, trigger effects, and then there are quick effects. All three are technically not the same, and it's kind of just a thing, alright? So, ignition is essentially the kind of effect that you can activate only on your turn, and they're activated essentially manually. So, they're buttons that basically kind of glow yellow and you have to press them, but they can only be started as chain link 0, if that makes sense. And this type of effect can be identified pretty easily. So we'll go to Taya, okay, I think, right? Taya, maybe? Or is it still like this? Okay, how do you spell Taya? Oh wait, isn't it like this? Alright, so Taya, this first effect here. You can banish one Sword Soul card or one Wire Monster from your graveyard, special summon one Sword Soul token. So this would be an ignition effect. So this can never be chain 2. Never. Never, ever, ever. Because this can only be activated as chain link 1. So this effect does not have a condition attached to it to an extent. So it kind of does with the you can banish one Sword Soul card or one Wire Monster from your graveyard. But it does not say it does something when something happens. It does not say if A happens, then B happens. So, for example, we can go to Unchained, and let's look at Unchained Twins Aruha here. So, Aruha says, if this card on the field is destroyed by a card effect, except by Unchained Twins Aruha, or by battle, I don't know why it has this condition, but then you can special summon one Unchained monster from your hand or deck, except for Unchained Twins Aruha. So, this will be able to use its effect when either of these conditions are met. This here is a trigger, and because this is a trigger, if let's say you have a bajillion Unchained cards, and then Raigeki is unleashed on the board, then all of them will start a chain. So it is not guaranteed for this to be, well, any of these effects, because all Unchains essentially have this effect, or a lot of them, that when they're destroyed, they will special summon another Unchained. Well, not all of them have this effect exactly, but they do something when they're destroyed by either battle or card effect, so all of these will trigger at around the same time, and you can choose the chain order for this, but we're not going to go too deep into that right now. So that will essentially allow you to use this as chain 2, chain 3, chain 4, whatever. So that is totally possible. And yeah, so highlighting on this a little bit more. Unchained Twins Aruha here has optional effects. So the ignition effect, the trigger effect, well, ignition effects can never really be mandatory. That becomes a whole different type of effect. So here, if we use this effect, if Aruha is destroyed, you are not required to summon an Unchained monster from your hand or deck. But if we go ahead and go to Dark World, for example, if you trigger a Dark World effect, so let's say, for example, with Ceruli, if this card is discarded to the graveyard by any type of card effect, well, sure. So if this card gets discarded, which I guess has happened, this will be special summoned to your opponent's field at defense position. Notice how it does not say can anywhere, so that just simply means that it will happen when the trigger condition is met. So I don't know why you would play, like, for example, a card that just says, if your opponent special summons a monster, you go -1 in hand, just cause, and not much else, or for that matter, -2. Then the card from your hand must special summon or something like that. Something goofy like that, right? But like yeah, that would be a mandatory effect, and you must do it. There is no choice. The only choice you get when it comes to mandatory effects is just chain order. So let's say we have, for example, card destruction, and then I have Ceruli, Grafa, and then I don't know. Doesn't super matter. Like gold. Then I could choose the chain order. So I could go chain 1, Grafa, chain 2, gold, and then chain 3, Ceruli, or whatever order I want. That's about all you can do with like mandatory effects, I guess. Aside from that, they're just simply mandatory. You must do them, or even attempt to do them. So let's say, for example, your opponent has a burn card that only triggers specifically if you activate a monster effect, and you want to send Grafa to remove like a different floodgate they have on the field or something. Well, if you activate Grafa, you'll lose though. So instead, you were thinking maybe I will send Grafa and then special summon it from the graveyard, and then I'll just run over the guy, turning off his floodgate. But then you forget this effect is mandatory, and you get burned to death because this effect is indeed mandatory, and yeah, nothing you could really do about it. So that's a bit long-winded, but that's basically how triggers work to an extent. So um, there are also technically continuous effects, which just are always active. Sometimes they have conditions as well, but the condition will be listed on the card, so we won't super worry about that. Next, we're going to look at spells and traps. So essentially, traps cannot be activated, uh, well, until you set them for 1 turn. So yeah, that's kind of how they work. However, if a trap is in the graveyard and they have a trap effect, so let's go with, for example, Trivia Karma. If we have Trivia Karma in the graveyard and your opponent has a DD Crow, which banishes a card in the graveyard, they will never be able to stop you from activating Trivia Karma, okay? So this card here says, let's see, you can banish this card from your graveyard, add 1 spell trap that mentions Visa Starfrost from your deck to your hand, except for Trivia Karma. So your opponent, if they target DD Crow, you simply just chain Trivia Karma. If you activate Trivia Karma as chain link 1, it's already banished, and there's nothing for DD Crow to banish. So yeah, that's kind of how this works as well. But the effect up here, to activate this, you would need to set this for 1 turn, and then it would be activatable immediately next turn in like the draw phase. And this applies to quick play spells as well, except they can be played the turn, well, on your first turn, so you don't have to wait a turn. But the moment you set them, they become a trap and they don't become activatable. So just covering that real fast. And then we're going to cover different forms of removal. So there are a bunch of different forms of removal. And here we have Doom King Ballad Rock. And then let's grab Armageddon. Or is it not Armageddon? Wait, no, it's not Armageddon. Ragnarok. Okay, so We have Ragnarok here, and then let's grab, let's see. Let's do Raigeki, I guess. This is fine. And then let's do Gingyusu. Okay. And then, let's see, one more. Let's do Early Noir. So, all of these guys have different forms of removal, and then we have Raigeki, which is also a form of removal. So, there are still a few more forms of removal, I believe, that I am forgetting, probably, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So, here we have Doom King Balladrock, which is Banish, and then we have Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok, which is also a Banish. So, notably, these are a bit different. So, DDD Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok says, once per turn, you contribute one other DD monster, then target one monster your opponent controls, banish it. So, we're just going to focus on this right here. Then target one monster your opponent controls, banish it. Okay. So banishing a monster essentially puts it to what you might call the banished zone, I guess. There's no like super concrete term for this, so a banished card is banished. Yep. And they're kind of in a separate place from the graveyard, so you can think of it as like the graveyard, but less accessible. That's usually just all it is, right? And then we have Doom King Balladrock. So notably, we're not going to focus on all this card text, but we have negate that effect. Banish one monster from the field or graveyard. So with this banish, it's actually different from this because it simply does not say target. If a card does not say target, it does not target. And targeting versus non-targeting is pretty simple. The difference is that the target is more or less chosen during the chain resolution, and this is chosen before the chain resolution. This is chosen in chain, essentially. So, let's say, for example, I have a monster on the field. So, let's go with Rosin. So, we have Vanquished Soul. So, if I have Rosin on the field, you'll probably want to maybe try to banish it, okay? So, I have Rosin on the field. You attempt to banish it with, let's say, Ragnarok. I can tag this out for a different Vanquished Soul. So, like, I can use Caesar Valius' effect to target a Vanquished Soul monster, return it to the hand, and if you do, special summon this card from your hand. So, we're going to do this, targeting Rosin, and then if you did Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok first, so chain 1, and then chain 2, we do Caesar effect. I effectively dodged this, okay? But if we instead did Doom King Balladrock, this will not choose Rosin. So if you go ahead and chain to Caesar Valius, in this case, we will still be able to banish Caesar Valius. But with Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok's effect, for example, it says you tribute one other DD monster. So here you lose your effect to banish essentially, and don't really gain anything for it, and you also lose one of your DD monsters. Doom King Baldrack doesn't really have that kind of cost, but yeah. You just get to banish a monster from the field or graveyard, in which case we'll just banish a dude still, so we don't go so negative. So destruction effects essentially just send cards to the graveyard. That's about all they do, essentially. It gets more complicated when you like start thinking about pendulums, so we simply won't focus on pendulums right now. Because send to the graveyard effects don't send them to the graveyard either. But don't worry about that too much right now. No one really plays pendulum anyways. Wait, why'd I bring up a pen card? Damn. Well, anyways. Next, we have Shuffle into the deck. So, we have Expertly Noir here. Well, this effect simply says it places a card your opponent controls or in their graveyard and place it to the bottom of the deck. So this essentially just puts your card back in your deck. And this just gets well, I would categorize this as shuffle into the deck. And yeah, this is pretty simple. This will just simply put a card from wherever it lists back into your deck. Yeah. Well, now I guess if you want access to that card again, you have to draw it or search it. So yeah, that's about it. Nothing to super elaborate on here. So then there's send one card your opponent controls to the graveyard here. So just send to graveyard. Well, it just sends to the graveyard. So if a card is sent to the graveyard, there is a difference because there's also protection. So for example, if we go ahead and bring out, well, if we go back to the Unchained stuff, this matters for this, not just for protection, I guess, but these conditional triggers. So back to Aruha once again. If this card on the field is destroyed by card effect or by battle, you can special summon a Unchained monster, but if you send it to the graveyard instead, that is not destroying it. That is different. Even though destruction technically sends to the graveyard as well, it's you directly send it to the graveyard versus destroying it to send it to the graveyard. That is the difference, I suppose. So in this case, this would trigger Aruha if you used Raigeki. If you used Dingirsu, it would not trigger any Unchains. And there's also the issue of, for example, protection. So if we have, for example, IP Masquerena, and any Link monster is made with IP Masquerena, it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effect. So any monster made with IP Masquerena becomes immune to Raigeki, and then only something like either a Dingirsu, a Doom King, or maybe a Noir. So just something with a different form of removal, besides destruction, then that would matter. So this, maybe you do want to send your opponent's cards to the graveyard for some reason. So with Dingirsu, it would just get sent and not destroyed and bypass this protection. And there are some other cards with this kind of decks where it matters. Like, for example, let's go with Lady Lab. So for some reason, this card has protection. Who knows why? So this card cannot be targeted with card effects, and it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Well, aren't we quite lucky here with Dingirsu then? Because not only does it never mention targeting on this effect, but it does not destroy, so this can put Lady Labyrinth in the graveyard. Nice. So this is an instance where both parts of this matter. If it targeted and then just sent to the graveyard, this wouldn't work. If this didn't target and then destroyed, wouldn't work. And that's just how it goes, I guess. So moving on. Now there are cards that we're going to go into. Cards that search cards. So sometimes there are conditions to the search, sometimes there are not. So with an example of a card with a condition to search, I guess let's go with Trivi Karma. So Trivi Karma has the condition where, well, two conditions essentially. First, it must be in the graveyard. Secondly, you will banish Trivi Karma, and then you get to add a spell trap that mentions Feast of Starfrost from your deck to your hand. So essentially two conditions right here, just to search. Okay. And then, let's see, let's go with Reinforcement of the Army, I guess. So Reinforcement of the Army here. Add one level 4 or lower warrior monster from your deck to your hand. So essentially, there's no real condition here. You just simply have the card in hand, and you can just activate this, and you can add any level 4 or lower warrior monster from your deck to your hand. And This is pretty important. If you've noticed, this card doesn't say the word once per turn, or for example, with let's go with Rosin. You can only use each effect of Vanquished Soul Rosin once per turn, and we're not going to focus on the rest of this. But any card that basically says its name and once per turn, and then it'll tell you which effects typically. So any card with card text like this essentially means its effects can only be used once per turn, but truly once per turn. So we call this a hard once per turn. If we were to instead, well, a better card that exemplifies this is like this card. This is like a walking paradox almost. But okay, so we'll go with Sudri here. When this card is normal summoned, you can add one card that mentions Black Winged Dragon from your deck to your hand, except Black Winged Sudri the Phantom Glimmer. Contribute one monster, special summon one Phantom Glimmer token. Winged Beast Tuner Dark level 2 attack 700, defense 700. Then you take 700 damage. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck turn you activate this effect, except for synchro monsters. You can only use this effect of Blackwing Sudri, the Phantom Glimmer, once per turn. So, it this states clearly you can only use this effect of Blackwing Sudri, the Phantom Glimmer, once per turn. So this is a hard once per turn. But up here, this first effect, when this card is normal summoned, this is a separate effect. So this effect is not once per turn, is what it's saying. So if you were to normal summon Sudri multiple times, this is not hard once per turn, even though the other effect is. But this is only on normal summon, although you can actually normal summon this multiple times in one turn, which is pretty interesting. So, yeah, Sudri can search as many times as you like, as long as you can normal summon, and you have targets in the deck. So, with an effect like this, you cannot add cards that don't exist, essentially, right? So you could not, because of how Yu-Gi-Oh works, if your effect does not have the capacity to resolve properly, it can't be activated. So I'll just throw that in, you you know. So cool. Then let's see. So let's see. Next we have soft once per turns. So if we go ahead and go into, let's see, what's a fun one? Let's do this. Let's see if this says once per turn. Armageddon? No, when this card is summoned. So then I guess let's go with Dark Grepher. So this will do. So Dark Grepher says, once per turn you can discard one dark monster, send one dark monster from your deck to the graveyard. So we're just simply going to focus on the once per turn part. So what does once per turn mean? Well, it means once while this card is face up per turn, essentially, or something. So if you were to special summon a second Dark Grepher, it would also be able to use this effect. If you were to normal summon, I guess, a second Sudri, you would not be able to use the effect that it says you can only use this effect of Blackwing Sudri, the Phantom Glimmer, once per turn. So the one that gets name dropped cannot be used more than once per turn. That is truly true. But with a soft once per turn, it just your monster essentially has amnesia. You can consider it like that. Like, did I activate this effect this turn? Huh. Oh well, don't remember. Anyways, do it again. So if you were to flip Dark Grepher face down and then back face up, huh, did I activate this effect? Guess not. It will activate it again. If you summon the same Dark Grepher after putting it into the graveyard and then back on field or hand to field, just basically removing it from field and putting it back on field again. Huh, did I activate this effect? Oh well, I guess we'll just send another card, you know? That is essentially how once per turns work. And some of you who have dealt with Mirror Jade might be very familiar with this fact. Yep. And then there is also, let's see. Well, there are certain stipulations on certain effects. So let's go with Vata, I think, right? Let's see. No, wait. Oh, here we go. Vata. So now we have to focus on a few different keywords now. So this here is not important here. Okay. So let's go over this effect here. During your main phase, you can send this card on the field to the graveyard along with one or more non-tuner Blackwing monsters from your deck so that the total levels sent equal exactly 8. And if you do, special summon one Blackwing Dragon from your extra deck. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except for dark monsters. So some cards have restrictions like that. Sudri is one of them as well. So this prevents you from summoning monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn. There's also just for this turn, essentially, meaning uh, if you did summon a monster from the extra deck that was not a dark monster, this effect just becomes no longer activatable. But no, that's not super important. So notably, this effect is says, and if you do. So if you do not, this effect changes. So this effect says it will send this card on the field, so it will send Vata, and then it will send one or more non-tuner Blackwing monsters from your deck. So it says to the graveyard here specifically, and then if you do. So if you cannot send to the graveyard, for example, there is a card that instead banishes cards immediately when they would have went to the graveyard, like, well, any of the cards that do that, so Macrocosmos, for example. Then, of course, you can still resolve the first part of this effect to an extent, and you will attempt to do so, but you will not be able to do so. And specifically because this is, and if you do, you're allowed to still activate the effect despite your cards not being able to go to the graveyard. But you didn't, right? So you do not get the effect where you special summon a Blackwing Dragon from your extra deck. So that's an example of one of these effects. If the card, instead of saying something like, and if you did, and if you do, it said, then you must be able to meet the condition before you activate the effect. So let's see. What is an example of this? So let's go with Nibiru. So Nibiru says, during your main phase, if you're going normal or special summon 5 or more monsters this turn, quick effect, you contribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible, and if you do special summon this card from your hand, then special summon one primal being token. So if you were, for some reason, unable to summon a primal being token, the other two parts of this effect, even if they're technically possible to resolve, cannot resolve, because that's how the ruling works, I guess. Because this then. And notably, then is mandatory, even if you don't like it. So, like, this will be a really dumb example, but let's say it's, we have a card that says, destroy a monster on the field, then stab your opponent, you know? Maybe you don't want to stab your opponent, but, you know, it's part of the effect. You gotta do it if you destroy the monster on the field. And, in fact, if the monster on the field is destroyed, you must do it if it's possible. You know? If you could not stab your opponent, though, I guess the effect is not resolvable. Well, that was a little unhinged, but let's not do that again. Anyways. So, yeah, if the then part of the effect is not resolvable for whatever reason, then you wouldn't be able to activate the effect. If, for example, though, it is still possible, but then an effect triggers or activates, just something in general that makes you're then no longer possible, the effect will still try to um, do its best and essentially do as much of the effect as it can in the order it states. So it will tribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible. So maybe this is still possible, but then the special summon this card from your hand part is not possible. Then the last part won't happen either. So then special summon one primal being token because this did not happen. But let's say, for example, something a little bit different happens. So let's say you're no longer able to tribute, then these two effects don't happen. So that's kind of how it works. So we can even extend this a little bit further. So let's use a different example for this. So let's say we have Therian King Regulus. So it says here clearly that I can target a Therian monster or a machine monster in my graveyard, special summon this card from my hand, and if you do, equip that monster to this card. So if I do chain 1 Regulus and you do chain 2 DD Crow to whatever I target for Therian King Regulus, then my effect will still try to resolve as much as possible. So it will special summon Therian King Regulus, and I will not be able to equip a monster to this card because you banished it. So that's how that would work. But yeah, if you were to banish the card before I even activate this effect, then I would not be able to activate Therian King Regulus at all, because I no longer have a target. So it's this kind of thing. So when you get into pretty complicated board states, maybe this will help you out a little bit. Maybe. Next, we're going to focus on trigger timings. So we have Haveness, and then we will grab, let's see. Let's do something goofy. Horrors. And then one more. Let's see. So, yeah. Let's go with Unchained again. So we have Aruha here, and then we'll grab. Actually, let's do. Lulu will Lilith. This is a new card, so might as well. So here we have different chain timing, basically. So there are certain effects and stuff that they won't resolve. Well, they won't be activatable, even if their effects are technically activatable the moment this happens, right? Well, that's how I would put it. So let's go over some of these. So we have when. This keyword here essentially means that immediately preceding this becomes possible, okay? So you can activate this effect. So when your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So with Haveness here, this effect, so this will require your opponent to activate a monster effect on the field, but when they do so, you can immediately chain onto whatever they used. So this would be like maybe chain 1, chain 2, doesn't super matter. You can chain 3 Haveness or chain 2 Haveness, so immediately chain onto what your opponent's doing. If the keyword instead of being when was if your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, the chain does not matter anymore. So right now the chain does matter because it says when, so this can miss timing. So if your opponent, for example, activates, it doesn't super matter what it is, but let's say they activate one effect on the field and then a second in the graveyard. So if this were the case, then Haveness is not activatable in that chain as chain link 3 because it says when, and technically your opponent hasn't activated a card effect on the field that Happiness can chain to, right? So that's kind of how that works. If we have an effect like Fenrir instead, which says, uh, if your opponent activates a monster effect, except during the damage step, you can target one face-up card your opponent controls. Banish it face down. So this effect has a different trigger. So if your opponent activates a monster effect, so it doesn't matter where for this one, but if they do, Fenrir does not immediately chain. Fenrir will be able to be used in the next chain to banish a card that your opponent controls that is face up. So a lot of conditions on that, but yeah. If these conditions are met, then you can go ahead and Fenrir effect to banish, I guess. But this will be in the next chain, very important. That is what ifs basically mean, so... Well, except for this one, if you control no monsters. This has no real meaning to me, but I mean... If this condition is true, I guess you can special summon this card from your hand. I guess. So, when you take damage from a card in your opponent's possession, you can special summon this card from your hand. You must control no cards to activate and to resolve this effect. So, this is also a when. So, technically, if your opponent burns you as Chain Link 1, and then they um, do literally anything else aside from, like, burn you, this will miss timing, and you will not be able to resolve Gorz, the Emissary of Darkness, to summon Gorz. If your opponent were to, like, attack you, that would also work, I guess. So you would take damage, and it would be from a card in your opponent's possession. It would be on your opponent's field, right? And then you'd be able to Gorz effect, summon your stuff. And that's great. It also specifically lists, like, battle damage and effect damage here. But yeah, whens can miss timing, ifs cannot really miss timing. So if an if condition is met, it can just be done, right? If a card says when instead, they can essentially miss timing. There's some cards that don't really miss timing, like Baron de Fleur does not miss timing, so like a when negate. But like, if your trigger is a when, then yeah, that's not great, like here. Even worse with certain effects, but there are also some other types of when triggers, like when a card is special summoned. So that can also miss timing, because specifically with how those effects work, let's go with this. So let's bring up Ninja. So Ninja. So here we have Hanzo. That says when this card is normal summoned, you can add one ninjutsu art card from your deck to your hand. So this generally will not miss timing, but there is actually a way to make this first effect miss timing. So generally this won't miss timing, but it technically can. So I won't go over the exact example for this, but we'll focus more on the second one. So when this card is flip or special summoned, you can add one ninja monster from your deck to your hand, except for Ninja Grandmaster Hanzo. So this effect can miss timing if Hanzo is not special summoned for, like, at the correct timing, more or less. So there are different cards that allow you to special summon Hanzo in Ninja, but we will mostly focus on these two cards. So we have Ninjutsu Art of Dancing Leaves, and then we have Maizen. So Maizen says, when your opponent activates a card or effect, quick effect, you can special summon one ninja monster from your deck in face up or face down defense position. You can only use this effect of Maizen, the battle ninja, once per turn. So this is a hard once per turn, but whatever. So this is indeed a ninja, Ninja Grandmaster Hanzo. So you can summon Hanzo off of Maizen, but here's an issue. This will always, always, always miss timing. Always. And that is because for when this single cardboard here has this nice text, when, because it says when. So if you were to summon it with an effect as Chain Link 1, this will always never miss timing. Unless that effect also does something else aside from just summoning. Because the Chain Link 1 effect that summons this, let's say it says, I don't know, just special summon Ninja Grandmaster Hanzo, and then, I don't know, discard a card or something. This will miss timing. The last action of Chain Link 1 has to be to special summon, essentially, and that would trigger this correctly. Anything like, for example, I don't know, gain attack, like a monster gains 500 attack on field after you special summon Hanzo or something, miss timing, right? So, yeah, just because it says when. If this is if, instead, like if this card is flip or special summoned, then it would instead allow you to trigger Hanzo off of Maizen. But now that you know this, you should realize that if you ever summon Hanzo off of Maizen, it is literally impossible for Hanzo Search to ever work, because it says when. And this always has to be done as Chain Link 2. So, it never works. And then with Lulu Lilith, this is even more like a bit more complicated, because this is where priority matters a bit. So once per turn, if a card or a cards leaves the extra deck, you can make all monsters you currently control gain 500 attack permanently. Then you can negate the effects of one face-up card on the field until the end of this turn. So first off, this card has a lot of things on it. So this is soft once per turn for whatever reason. And then part 2 to this effect, it has some text that's kind of newish. A card leaves the extra deck, so basically if the card count for the extra deck ever goes -1, this will trigger. Cool. Except during the damage step, and then you can make all monsters you currently control gain 500 attack, and then it has a then here, but we're just going to focus on the last part of this. Then you can negate the effects of one face-up card on the field, and the fact that this is an if. So this can never happen in, like, chain to something, right? So let's say you activate a spell that makes a card leave the extra deck, and then it does something. Like, let's say, I don't know, destroy all cards on the field. Well, your Lulu Lilith is now in the graveyard, and it did not even get a chance to trigger. So, cool, I guess. Or rather, not cool, I guess, because this all happens in the next chain. And then, because of this being a trigger effect, instead of a quick effect, the timing on this can just be very bad. So, let's say we turn 1 summon Lulu Lilith, and then turn 2 our opponent summons an extra deck monster, and they have a trigger on summon. So, if that is the case, we are perfectly fine, alright? So, they will summon their dude, and they will be forced to chain because they are turn player. They get the priority, so on their trigger, they will get to do their trigger first, and then we will be able to do our Lulu Lilith chain to their chain, and it will always resolve like that. If they give up their effect and choose not to chain it, then even if we do choose to chain with Lulu Lilith, they miss the opportunity, and they will not be able to chain that effect as chain 2 to Lulu Lilith. If we, for some reason, still decide to chain 1 Lulu Lilith to their non-existent effect here. But if you've noticed that this only works if they are the turn player. If, for example, we have Lulu Lilith, and our opponent is not the turn player, right? But instead we are the turn player controlling Lulu Lilith, then the chain order changes. So there are effects that allow this. So if our opponent special summons a monster from the extra deck in this case, and they have a trigger, then we can activate Lulu Lilith. But this will be chain 1. So whatever effect they are resolving or attempting to resolve will always resolve against our copy of Lulu Lilith. But this also doesn't take into account, for example, if our opponent is activating instead of a trigger, a quick effect, because the priority on that is different. Triggers will always happen first. So the order of effects goes mandatory, trigger, and then basically then quick effect. So because Luluwa Lilith is a trigger, you'll never be able to chain this after a quick effect. So that can be a bit problematic and making this janky and unable to negate certain effects. So for example, if my opponent is just activating a trap card, even if I know they'll activate it, so as the next chain, right? For whatever reason. Like, I don't know, maybe the trap says if a certain card is summoned or whatever, and I somehow trigger the leave the extra deck condition, then uh, I still won't ever be able to negate their trap. So, yeah, that can kind of suck, but it is intriguing because this technically can negate any card on the field, right? So this can negate any type of card effect. So this is essentially an omni negate, which refers to a negate that negates every single type of card. But it also can't negate cards because it just doesn't have the timing window to do so. Because trigger traps aren't really a thing to an extent, right? Like, I mean, they're kind of trigger traps. Like, when certain conditions are met, a trap can activate. Those exist, but they still count as quick effects, I believe. So, yeah, that doesn't super work out. So, with Ninjutsu Art of Dancing Leaves, going back to ninjas, this can be chained as Chain Link 1 or Chain Link 2, whatever. So activate this card by targeting a ninja monster or one face down defense position monster on the field, tribute it, and if you do, special summon one ninja monster from your deck. So if I go ahead and use this as Chain Link 2 to summon Hanzo, Hanzo will miss timing. If I use this as Chain Link 1, this simply just special summons a ninja monster, so Hanzo will not miss timing if this is Chain Link 1. So pretty simple there. And one more type of effect, I guess. So we'll go ahead and search adventure. So we have Draco back effect, return to hand. This is different from return to deck because instead of cards going from the wherever it says to the deck, instead they go to the hand. Yeah, that's it. So that is pretty much, I think, every major form of removal. And then there are protection effects that simply say, this cannot happen. So, I guess, let's go with, Diabolo, I think, right? Yeah. Darkus Diabolos, Lord of the Lair. Your opponent cannot tribute this face-up card on the field and cannot target it with card effects. So this basically has targeting protection, and this cannot be tributed. And then, for example, we can go to Libromancer, and then, yeah, we have not Fireburst, Firestarter. So this card cannot be destroyed or banished by card effects. So this has destruction protection and banish protection. So you just can't banish it, nor can you destroy it. So they're essentially like for every single type of removal or every type of effect like this, there's probably some card out there with a form of protection that works against this form of removal. So yeah, and also targeting protection. So if your card targets, it just doesn't work on that card anymore, I guess. So for example, like this banish effect will not work if your opponent says it cannot be targeted. Well, if your opponent's card says it cannot be targeted, then the effect to banish by Ragnarok over here would not work. To plain and simple, I guess. Great. And yeah, so this is like every major form of removal and most of the keywords. So I guess there's also if you do, I guess. So let's go over that as well. So we have rockets. So uh, this is just insanely jank. I don't know why rockets work like this, but whatever. So we have Striker Dragon here with this lovely effect. You can target one face-up monster you control and one rocket monster in your graveyard, destroy that monster on the field, and if you do, add that other monster from the graveyard to your hand. So if you don't buy the effect of Striker Dragon, destroy a monster on the field, whatever monster on the field that you choose, then you don't get to add the monster from the graveyard to your hand. It doesn't matter what happens to that monster. Like, it could even gain destruction protection. If it is not destroyed, the other half of this effect does not resolve. So it's similar to the Vata example. But this is even more, like, weird because this is your own archetype kind of, like, just screwing you. So you have this effect. When a Link monster's effect is activated that targets this face-up card on the field, quick effect, you can destroy this card. So it will destroy it by its own effect. And then your rockets typically have some like form of effect. For this one, it's look at your opponent's extra deck and banish one card from it. And during the end phase, if this card was destroyed by a battle or a card effect and sent there this turn, you can special summon a rocket monster from your deck, except for Silver Rocket Dragon, which all rocket monsters have this as well. So this is essentially a delayed effect, which also exists. So the condition for a card to meet its effect can be met like quite a while ago, and the effect just won't resolve till like a certain part of the turn. So there are a lot more different type of card effects, but this covers all of the major ones. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer any questions you may or may not have. So, yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!